So bear with me. I'm going to admit everyone once I hit two. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the broadcast this evening. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator.
How are you this evening, sir?
Oh, well, I'm okay. Contrary to rumors.
I do remember one music person who said, how do rumors get started?
I usually start it myself.
Well, I didn't say that, sir, but good evening to our viewers. Thank you for joining us again this evening. As was announced last week, we're going to be dedicating this evening to talking about the special topic, designing a foreign policy agenda for the new administration. And of course, we're talking about the new administration in the country of Nigeria. So before we go into that, I'd just like to put out some ground rules because we will be bringing people on to share their comments If you want your video to be brought on, please make sure that it's bright, it's clear, so we can see your face. And when you have the time to speak, please make it very brief so I can get as many people as possible in to contribute to the session. But again, I will prompt you. And again, some of the names I don't know. So I do apologize if I have to butt in to ask to bring the point to a close. But I'm going to try as much as possible to get as many people as we can into the session. So thank you all. But let me also just remind ourselves very briefly before we start on that topic, how we got to this point discussing this topic today. So there was a question last week where someone had asked the Prof to share his views on how do we get Nigeria back into a position where we're recognized from a foreign policy point of view. And Prof gave us three key things. One was building a military industrial complex, and that was important for any sort of activist foreign policy. The second one was he talked about a South Atlantic Treaty Organization, that was also key. And the third one was about building a space program by partnering with some of the major private owners that we had out there in the United States specifically. So we're going to take each one of those one by one, and I will open the floor up to people so you can comment on the points that are raised. But just before we start that, Prof, I know we've dedicated today, but there were two things that have happened that I'd like to get your comment on before we go into the topic of today proper, because I think they're very important points. The first one is the news that the King of England will be opening up his archives for someone who is doing a course to be able to go in there and use the archives as part of their project. That's number one. And then number two, sir, is for the last, I think, 400 days or more now, the war in Ukraine had been going on. And most of the bombings were happening off Russian soil. In the last few days, we've now had two major issues. One, a blogger that was blown up right in St. Petersburg, and now the Ministry of Defense that caught fire. I'd like to get your views on those 2 points before we go into the topic for today.
Well, all right. Recall that either last week or 2 weeks ago, you brought up the issue of a BBC correspondent who turned in her resignation and said she was going to devote the rest of her life to digging into her family's contribution to the slave trade and the profits which they made from it, and see how, to what extent, I mean, at least they can make reparation. And we discussed it on this program, and we welcomed what the steps which he had taken, and we thought it was worthy of emulation. So when today the news came out that King Charles III has decided that Buckingham Palace will open their archives to the participation of the royal family, not just the immediate royal family, not just Queen Elizabeth II and him, but really the royal records from whenever that record started to start being kept, their participation in the slave trade. And this has been opened to a scholar who is writing a PhD thesis on it. And when I heard that, my mind went to that BBC correspondent. And you never know, who will appreciate your gesture and copy that gesture if it is a positive one. Of course, I mean, I'm not saying there is a one-to-one correlation, but then who knows? It also perhaps, indicates the kind of king that Charles III is going to be, especially on issue of race. Because there's no way you will talk about the slave trade without talking about race, reparation, and positiveness towards minorities. I think he is showing where he's departing from his mother. One is not saying this in condemnation of Queen Elizabeth II. More often than not, we are creatures of our environment. And maybe that environment now is just right for King Charles the third to do this thing. The other one is actually there have been more bombings than this. Recall the bombing on the Crimean Bridge. Recall the bombing of, the so-called capture of some citizens, Russian citizens, from a village on the border with Ukraine. Also, there have been drone attacks on Air Force bases within Russia. So really, I think that we are starting to have hit backs. We don't know. Let us be careful here. We don't know who's responsible for this. It could be opponents of Putin internally who are responsible for this. It could be opponents within the Russian military who simply feel that they are being wasted. And it could be special forces from Ukraine. So there are interesting developments. Our friend Macron from France, who thinks he's a born-again Napoleon, is of course in China, while Paris is burning. He's going to spend 3 days in China trying to persuade China to play an interlocutory role or a mediatory role in the war. How he thinks he will do that, I don't know. But from the time of de Gaulle, it's average. And once Angela Merkel left the scene, there has been this attempt by Macron to step in. But it's not good. The major player is going to be the United States if there's going to be anyone who could persuade Russia to mediate in this conflict, because it's the United States that has sufficient power to put pressure on Ukraine to accept whatever whatever things will need to be done to move from I'm not going to give up any inch of Ukrainian territory, while China will be the one who will be able to put pressure on Russia to say, well, you are going to have to give this up. But to think that France can do that, France doesn't have that kind of power.
Thank you very much for that, sir. And on that note, I will open up the floor. The first point that we want to discuss is, sir, you mentioned that building a military industrial complex was important to building our foreign policy or rebuilding our foreign policy in Nigeria. And I want to open the floor to anyone who wants to comment on that. Please raise your hand. I'll unmute you and bring you on. You can ask your question or make your comment on that. How important is building a military industrial complex to foreign policy? The Prof has indicated that. Please raise your hand so I can see that and we can bring you on that point. Let me know. I'm just getting the team to have a look. Please do raise your hand if you want to comment on that. I know the Prof has mentioned that one of the things that brought China to where China is today is that investment in their military capacity. Do you agree with what the Prof is saying, or do you disagree with that? Let me see. I think I can see Professor Akin Akinyemi there. I will just ask you to unmute yourself now, sir.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I
Good.
think that there cannot be any disputing the fact that we need to build a military-industrial complex as a matter of necessity. The government of Nigeria has tried in the past. They put in place what they call defense industries. In fact, they built a mighty building in front of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs on Kofo Abayomi. So they were supposed to be manufacturing all these defense equipment, weapons. But at the end of the day, it has been turned into a center for manufacturing furniture, irrelevant things. In this case, the problem to address there is why. Now, there is no country of the world that wants to remain relevant that wouldn't need to have it. I think it's a desideratum. We need to actually begin to look at it more critically, especially that Africa, not only as cornerstone, but as centerpiece of Nigeria's foreign policy. We need to have the capacity, the capability to intervene when there is the need. Recall the time for ECOMOG 1 in Liberia, ECOMOG 2 in Sierra Leone. the capability to assist in maintenance of regional, security. I think anything short of beginning with strengthening the military cannot be good enough. I think the only thing is that Professor Akinyemi is always looking further, looking into the future more than anyone else. He has said this long, long time ago. And if you look at the impact, the implication of the concert of medium powers, people do not understand that. What China, what the US, what the EU, what India, all these one country versus the whole of Africa, what they call summit. That is precisely what Professor Akinyemi had initially talked about. Now, concert of medium powers, this is an initiative of one single country. Now bringing all other countries to Lagos to come and discuss. I think they later changed the concert of medium powers to Lagos Forum. Now, Nigeria was just like what China is doing, what France is doing, one single country, France, meeting with the whole of Francophone Africa. Now, when this idea was mooted, that particular time, people did not actually look at the fact that this is an initiative by a Nigerian, representing a Nigeria in this case. Now, many countries came, they discussed. That clearly pointed to the fact that Nigeria was being made relevant in political discourse in the world. And if in this particular case we are talking about the domestic base, if Nigeria had had a special military industrial complex that can be internationally reckoned with, beginning with the regional context, please, we will not be where we are today. I think that we should all support the idea of building a military industrial complex. Thank you.
Thank you for that submission, sir. There is a question here or a comment here, which I would put out, and maybe Professor Akinyemi, this would be for you. This person is saying the Defense Industries Corporation of Nigeria was established for this purpose. What is required is strengthening this corporation and also restructure our military institutions for effectiveness. How would you respond to that, sir?
I totally agree with the submission. I totally agree with the submission made by our compatriot who's put that in. That military industrial complex was actually established the same year that Brazil also built its own.
Correct.
And as Professor Akinyemi has reminded us, while we are busy building furniture, Brazil had built airplanes, they had built tanks, they had built naval ships. We have not gone beyond that rudimentary, the rudimentary production of guns, some bullets. You could see and it's not that the money is not there. It's not that the resources are not there. Again, this is part of the consequences of the cleavage, the domestic cleavage that we have in this country, where we will not put round pegs in round holes. There are Nigerian scientists both at home and abroad, who you could bring and make sure that that military industrial complex is an island by itself. Because usually the criticism that is usually made is the same Nigeria that cannot produce electricity for its people, or that cannot produce water for its people, even in urban centers, is the one you are asking to do this. And I always then remind people, please go to India, go to Pakistan, and these are two nuclear powers, and yet there are areas of these two countries where the poverty that you would see, you can't find it. You won't find it in Nigeria. But what they have decided to do is, when they've identified a particular area in which they want to emphasize, they simply concentrate, they block that off from whatever the other, problems and issues that they have, and ensure that all the facilities that are needed to produce that particular thing will be provided for it. There are our universities. I recall 1976, when at the institute, well, I had proposed. People thought that it's only when I was a minister that I proposed the black bomb. No, I had raised it when I was DGNI, that Nigeria should think of nuclear facilities, which could be of industrial advantage to us. And of course, there will be military spillover. And the Obasanjo administration at that time decided to pick 3 universities and give them money. ABU, Ahmadu Bello University, OAU, Obafemi Awolowo University, and University of Nigeria in Soka, so that they could buy at a rudimentary level nuclear facilities where people can, people with lecturers with nuclear in the nuclear field can build up a whole set of scholars and students in this field. And it started off, but like everything else, after that government left office, nobody was interested in that anymore, and resources were no longer available. I don't think there's any university in Nigeria where nuclear experts are at work in Nigeria. So it's not that we cannot do it. Even now, I can imagine people who will say military industrial complex. In fact, I don't want to use China as an example. That's why I used Turkey as an example. Because when Turkey found out that she was not being respected, she wasn't invited to join BRICS, and she knew that she wanted to become a medium power in that Aegean Sea area. It turned inward and developed a military industrial complex such that you can now, even Nigeria has gone to sign an agreement with Turkey about supply of drones and supply of some military equipment. Now, the gap between Nigeria and Turkey is still not that too far for us not to think that we can make it.
Sir, just building on the last question from, I think this person was Latif Bakari that asked that previous question. When you say a military industrial complex, what exactly does that mean? I think I've heard building nuclear capability that could serve the economy. Is that what military industrial complex means? Or what exactly it is? Is it that you refer to when you use that, that terminology?
Well, actually, you know, there is no country in the world that in terms of processes did not start with investment in the military research that then spills over into civilian industrial areas, because government finds it by far easier to invest in the military field to start with. When you think of most of the advances that were made, whether in terms of going to the moon, rocketry, and what have you, the investment in the research is first in the military area, but then they find out that it spills over into advances in the civilian area, where the civilian sector then benefits from the research-funded military area. I mean, the planes, take the 747, even though I don't think it's in, excuse me, I don't think the 747, the Boeing 747 is in use here. It started as a military project, and having achieved what they wanted to achieve, then the civilian found out that, actually, it will help in the civilian sector as flying objects, and it worked very well. So that's why it is hooked on together. So it isn't as if you take milk from the mouth of children. It's not as if what you should be using for hospitals, you now take that and you now start using it to produce tanks. No, you'll find out that the investment in research in the military area also spills over into the civilian area for the benefit of the country itself. I mean, after all, if you have if you are building say naval ships, for example, as long as, and one must emphasize that, as long as you don't put all the money into importing 30 naval ships, but you import 5 and you insist that the country from where you are importing the 5 will now build shipbuilding capabilities in your country for the remaining 25. Even though they are naval ships you are building, but it's the same facilities you will need that you can use to build tankers that can take your oil, your petroleum, your crude, your liquefied natural gas, or even your agricultural product. Right now, in fact, I think I read somewhere, and when I looked into it and I checked with people, it turned out to be true that most cargo planes fly in full here and leave Nigeria empty. They don't carry anything from Nigeria. And yet when they are coming, they are full. So we are still an important country rather than an export. Of course, I mean, they are not going to help us unless we put our feet down and say, well, we are not going to allow foreign ships. And it's under, is it WTO or UNIDO, anyway, one of these United Nations bodies that says that, global South countries should, should export, I can't remember the percentage, using their own facilities rather than asking foreign ships or foreign planes to come and evacuate the whatever it is contribution they are making to trade. The fault is ours. The fault is ours. It's not the foreign countries. When you look at behind it, again, you find corruption, that it is by far easier to take your percentage when the ships take out the crude than for you to build your own ships and have your own ships evacuate whatever it is you are producing as part of your own participation in trade. But all I'm just saying is there is a connection between investment in military research and consequences for in the civilian area.
So there was a point you raised, and maybe I don't know if Professor Akinyemi wants to answer this question I'm about to ask, or any other person who wants to contribute to this. Please just raise your hand so I can see your hand is raised, and I will come to you. Or you can type the message in the chat. I will pick it up from there. But sir, you referred to ABU, OAU, and UNN receiving some funding at the time from the government. And my question is this: how ready are the educational institutions in Nigeria to take on such a challenge as what we're having now? And is this something you do in the context of the educational institutions, or you create parallel organizations? For example, in the United States, I know they had something called DAPA, which was the Defense Advanced Research Program, and they looked at emerging technologies and how that could help. And some of the technology developed found its way out. I don't know if Professor Akinyemi would want to help with that. Are the educational institutions ready for this kind of challenge, or do we look at parallel organizations, whether existing or new ones?
Yeah, thank you. Using the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs as a case study, for instance, I can argue authoritatively that research institutions cannot be said to be ready. They are not ready. We know quite well that during the days of Professor Akinyemi at the NI, international journals, International Monetary Fund Direction of Trade Statistics, IMF direction on foreign direct investments, all those things. All the journals are up to date. They were up to date by that time. I've been carrying out research on different areas. We don't have up-to-date documentation. First point. The NI is underfunded. We know quite well that as of today, there is a considerable improvement since, for instance, we now have an effort to have a center for purposes of warning, alert system, mechanisms. They are doing all that. But you see, the library, what you require to work with is not provided. When I was Director General of the Institute, I complained about this. We requested for the recruitment of about 56 research fellows. Thank God that probably last month, they now saw the need, they have approved, they have recruited some people. But what about the funding? Now, black bomb, the idea of black bomb, which Professor Akinyemi raised. Please, if you want to understand the importance and implication of the suggestion of Professor Akinyemi, you must ask why, for instance, when the discussion about nuclear non-proliferation, when the negotiations started in 1963, why was it that France and China refused to cooperate? But they now accepted to cooperate after they have acquired capacity and capability. Now, when they have acquired the nuclear status. Why? Because, like Professor Akinyemi rightly pointed out, you will only be respected from the perspective of your military capability. Secondly, these the weapon states in international relations, they are basically the permanent members. They do not want any other country to acquire that particular capability. The excuse they gave is that they will be careless, they are not careful. But they are the only countries that can be consciously competent to manage that. But this is why countries like North Korea will refuse to comply with that. So all those countries that have acquired nuclear capability, they didn't get it on the platter of gold. Iran, they do not want Iran to do that, to have that. Iran has been fighting as well. So to have institutions to carry out military research, get many things done, it requires commitment, adequate funding, forward-looking, strategic calculations. The beauty, I do not want to engage in praise singing, but let truth be known. Let the truth be told. The Akinyemi of Nigeria has been foreseeing this, telling this well in advance. So as a serious scholar, as a serious researcher, and based on chronological analysis, when you take a look at what has been said at a particular time, and they are not listening, this is where the problem is. So if we carry out research today, are they going to implement the outcome? So the problem is not that we don't even have academic researchers. There are many military scholars in Nigeria. You go to National Defense College, they are there. You have diplomatists, you have scholars, they are thinking strategically. But the issue is that the coordination itself is a problem. Why was it that they wouldn't listen to Professor Akinyemi by the time he was making all this point? No. Is it that they do not know? I think these are some of the issues. So concretely, the answer to the question you made is that, look, I do not think, based on the situational reality of ground, that the educational institutions are ready. We will be ready if, for instance, they want objectivity of purpose, no federal character in research. Please, in the NI, without mentioning any particular ethnic group, some people do not want to work in the NI. They are not interested in research because there's no money there. One, there's no money to steal there. Nobody is interested in being a member of the governing council of the NI because there's no money there. Those who are there at the end of the day, well, they can condone it. So this is the issue. We need seriousness of purpose in order to have a military industrial complex. The researchers must be dedicated. They must be there. If you go to France, for instance, they have what they call CEAN, CEAN, centre d'études, that engages in strategic, research, all purposes, historians, medical practitioners, military strategies, all those things. I think we need that one.
Sir, there's a question here that I want to put to, maybe I'll go to Professor Akinyemi on this one. This person says there is no doubt the fact that in world politics today, military strength and sophistication is sine qua non to relevance in world affairs. But one thing that is constant with those countries being cited is discipline. How can we achieve the desired level of discipline in our system to follow and implement policies as prescribed by our institutions? And that came from Ibukun Olatidoye, is the person that's asked that question. Professor Akinyemi, do you want to take that, sir?
Well, yes. Disciplined, it is true that there are some cultures with embedded discipline. The Chinese, for example, or just let me say the Asians with the Confucian ideology has embedded in it discipline. But there is no race that cannot develop or be forced to embrace discipline. During the First Republic, the period between 1954 to 1963, when the rain started falling on our head, look at the progress. Look at the progress that we made amongst our regions. In fact, there was a study that was done. Please come and take this away. I'm so sorry. My phone is usually the one that causes trouble for me. I don't cause trouble for the phone. Look at the progress that we made. In fact, there was a study done, and I know I have a copy somewhere here, that if we had continued on that trajectory, within another 5 years, we will have caught up with a lot of the Scandinavian countries. we had disciplined leaders. We had disciplined leaders. And when you have disciplined leaders, their followers tend to copy them, following their footsteps. We also, at a period, had Murtala Mohammed, who was a very disciplined man, and I saw the way, because I worked with him, I saw the way he turned the civil service around. The lazy civil service that we used to have, he turned it around. So it is possible for us to be disciplined in this country, or in any country for that matter. Look at what is happening in Rwanda now. It's a very disciplined country. But if you're going to have a disciplined population, there cannot be people who will be, what's the word now? You can't have people who you will excuse, you will always find, excuses not to discipline them, not to punish them. The civil service will have to be disciplined. The judiciary will have to be disciplined. We will all have to be disciplined. But as fish rots from the head, so also development starts from the head, because it is the head that has a vision. And I mean, this is not magic science. If you have a Nigerian president who decides that he wants a military establishment that cannot be conquered by any other African country, then he knows what to do. The statistics are available from CIPRI about how many planes you need, how many tanks you need, what kind of the personnel that you need. Look, I served on the thruMYeyes panel for electoral reform. We used United Nations figures to show that we need, given the size of Nigeria, the physical size, and the population of Nigeria, that we need about 1.5 million policemen, just policemen, in order to guarantee security. We don't have up to 350,000. Now, we wrote that report in 2007 or so. They've done nothing about that report. Instead, every year, they told the president has approved that we can recruit 2,000 more policemen, and all the policemen will clap. That is crap. That's rubbish. You need one, and then election time comes. We now complain. Look at what has just happened at our own election time. We now complain that we have what? 1 policeman per polling unit, or 2 policemen per polling unit. And when you now have 10 thugs with cutlasses approaching, you expect these 2 policemen to challenge them with what? But as soon as the election is over, nobody again talks about a massive increase in the policemen that we need. And so that is what one means by from the top. You need a vision. And it is that vision that dictates the rest of your development.
There's a comment here, sir. Again, this is a comment from Latif A. Bakari. We also have the Steyr Special Purpose Vehicle Facility in Bauchi established to manufacture light armored tanks. What the new administration needs to do is to carry out an inventory of military infrastructure in Nigeria, develop a roadmap for their restructuring to achieve specific objectives aimed at improving our military capacity. Establishing several military universities is a waste of time. The naval dockyard in Apapa is capable of building vessels. It's just that we are not governed by the people who are sufficiently knowledgeable people or who have national interests in mind. That's a comment from Latif A. Bakari.
I agree. I have nothing new to add to that. He's absolutely right. Absolutely correct.
All right.
Let me, sorry, can I just,
yes,
give you one illustration? When I was a minister, I didn't know, of course, the background, but a document came before cabinet, and it talked about somewhere in between, I think between Nasarawa and any one of those states. And they talked about a company that was manufacturing airplanes. It had gone beyond just the one propeller one to the double propeller one. And this was brought before cabinet, and I was so excited. And I said, this is what we need in this country. This is a private man who has invested his money and has, brought in skilled people. Government must pump money into this so that we will now we will try to catch up with Brazil that at that time was producing the Embraer airline. And there was silence, I expected my colleagues in the cabinet to support me, but nobody was saying anything. And anyway, the president at that time, Ibrahim Babangida, said, well, look, let's leave that alone. And I said, sir, why should we leave that alone? Why? We are going to be buying planes for the Air Force. We are going to be buying planes for Nigerian Airways. And here is a Nigerian who has used his own resources. I said, so I don't understand. This is something we should be doing. He said, we want to do it. Well, I tend to be stubborn at times. I think that's probably the Ijisha in me. And I said, sir, you really must give us an explanation why something that is this, and somebody was kicking me under the table. So finally I leaned over and said, why are you kicking me under the table? He said, that man is an in-law of the president. If he decides to do that, they will accuse him of money for his in-law. I said, oh my God, I didn't know. So I said, sir, I withdraw my comments, my recommendation. I think everything is fine, sir. And everybody started laughing. They knew, I didn't know that there was a relationship between the president and this gentleman. So now you could, I mean, left to, now I would like to say, if it were Murtala Mohammed, I don't think he will have any compulsion. In fact, I think he probably would say it straight out. That man is my in-law, but what he's doing is what we should be doing, and I think we should put the money into it. He will say so. He was that powerful, I mean, as to face down his colleagues. So, and that's part of where I say that the cleavages, even within our own domestic system, at times serve as an impediment to our development.
Yes. Sir, I'm going to say something here, and I hope you wouldn't be angry with me on this, but I have grossly underestimated the amount of time it will take to address each one of these three topics. And I am thinking that maybe we should take the second one about South Atlantic Treaty Organization next week, so that we actually have a time for the discourse. Because I can see that someone is also asking a question here. I think you've addressed this somewhat, but this person says, building a military-industrial complex, is this not simply massaging self-ego? China, before expanding its military capability, foremost concentrated on feeding its milling population, a focus which Soviet Union lacked. And I think this goes back to the point that you raised a while ago. Yes, there are people starving in the economy. There are other areas in the economy that require investment. But understanding the trigger point, I think, is key, which is what this individual is saying. There are so many hungry people in the country. At what point do you then pivot into investing in military? I don't know if you want to respond to that, sir.
Yeah, the two things. Number one, depending on the mood of our colleagues, I don't mind us taking the second issue next week, and then the third issue the following week. We should deal thoroughly with each one of these matters. Now, it's not true that China had finished, it's not true that China had finished feeding its people before it went into the military industrial complex. In fact, it's the other way around. And even now, once you move out of the what I will call the industrial hubs in China, and you move into the rural areas in China, you still have areas, substantial areas with where they still have where people they say starvation and insufficient supply of food. But let me say this: there is no country in the world, that finishes solving its domestic problem before it then diverts money into its military industrial complex if it wants to be respected. Last week came out statistics that Nigeria is the highest importation of champagne in the world. That between last year and this year, I have forgotten the percentage that it gave. Is that what you want to be known for? That you drink more champagne that you don't produce than any other country in the world? Is that what you want to be noted for? Nigerians, are the greatest property owners in Dubai. Is that what you want to be noted for? You think you get any respect from that? there are things that we invest our money in that people just laugh behind our back. And I don't want to go to my grave without saying, I told you so. I brought this to your attention. It's just, I don't know, I don't know. And we've been, this has been our.
Oh, looks like I lost the prof there. But Professor Akinyemi, would you please help us with this? Because there is a question I want to put across to you, sir. And that question, if you just bear with me one second, let me just see if I can find this here. Just bear with me, please, while we get Professor. All right. I think I've got Professor Akinyemi here. Thank you, sir. My question is this, sir. We're talking about these ideas that have been raised for years and years, and nothing has happened. Do we have a way of identifying the roadblocks to implementation? Someone has suggested doing an inventory of the military infrastructure. What are the roadblocks to implementing some of these things? And is there a way we should be repackaging to ensure that we don't run into the challenge that we talk about it again and no one picks them up?
I think the starting point is at the level of who a Minister of Foreign Affairs should be. A Foreign Affairs Minister is supposed to be a visionary. A foreign minister must understand the dynamics of international relations. A foreign minister is not just another minister at the domestic level. You see, the beauty of a foreign minister is that, one, he will have the capacity, the capability of coordinating conflicting national interests. Now, reconciling Nigeria's national interests. If a foreign minister, for example, wouldn't understand that, for instance, you will need a military base, a strong economic base to be able to act, internationally and be relevant. There is no way any good suggestion made available to the minister that wouldn't go through. They wouldn't bother. I can tell you authoritatively that, for instance, foreign ministers who do not share Nigeria's national interest, how will you expect him to make things work? So the first obstacle is who is going to be considered for that particular position. Let me give you the example of the CMP, the Concert of Medium Powers, for instance. The idea of a concert of medium powers is simply meant to make Nigeria relevant in the absence of weak domestic economy. The idea is to take advantage of the international environment to improve, to address domestic problems. A school of thought has argued that, look, in Nigeria, without a strong domestic economic base, we can't do anything abroad. But Concert of Medium Power says, regardless of your situational reality, you can still exploit the opportunities internationally. That is how we should understand concept of medium powers. Now, the issue, okay, look at technical aid corps, for instance, as well. Today, it is the legacy, it is the only thing sustaining Nigeria's foreign policy. But when the idea was first mooted, please, the history is so clear on that. So please, if you want a solution to all these blockages that we are talking about, you must look at the pillar, the foundation, who is to be the foreign minister. And secondly, more importantly, you see, people, an individual cannot have a monopoly of ideas. The issue is that the Nigerian people, we are also accomplices to the remissness that has come to characterize political governance in Nigeria. When you have, we have read in the literature, let me just give this example to explain it. They wanted to build a tomato puree factory. Now, the environment where tomato is abundant, you know, produce for commercial purposes, you refuse to establish the factory near where the raw materials are. How will you expect something to work? So they brought ethnic politics there. The factory will be built far away, kilometers away. This is part of the problem. And I think that by the time we introduce objectivity of purpose into whatever we are doing, then all the obstacles can be naturally removed.
All right, sir. Thank you very much, Professor Akinyemi. Um, I'm not quite sure what's happening on the other end. I think that might be a technical issue there. But I want to thank everyone for participating tonight. We will continue the topic next week. We've got building the South Atlantic Treaty Organization suggestion, and we've also got building a space program suggestion. Those 2 points, we will bring them back next week. Thank you so much for all the comments that have been here, and we will try as much as possible to put this together and share some of these thoughts out with everyone. But I really do want to thank everyone for being here tonight. And Professor Akinyemi, thank you so much for stepping in this last few minutes of the program. Much appreciated, sir. And on that note, I will bring the program tonight to an end. Thank you all and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.